Hey, Benji here. Welcome to another episode of SimCity Guide to Custom Creations. This one's been a little tricky for me to get together because I've had a hard time understanding exactly how the color palettes work, but now that I think I've got a grasp on it, I can explain it. So first, just a huge thanks to Ryan Ingram for his continued help and support of this kind of new SimCity 5 modding community. In the first video, I gave an overview of the SimCity material pipeline, and then in episode 2, we took a look at all the textures used and the SimCity materials. So this third episode kind of wraps up what I think are the core concepts needed to understand the toolkit needed for making custom buildings in SimCity. So let's talk about the color palettes and how they work. You'll remember that there are 4 assets associated with each building: a material set, an interior map, a material info texture, and a color palette. Well, the color palettes are the assets that SimCity uses to add colors to materials. So zoomed in way up close, we can see a portion of the color palette. Now, one point or sample into the palette is a 2x2 block of pixels. So try to see not all the colors here as separate. They're grouped into 2x2 blocks. There are 256 columns of blocks, and there are 7 rows of blocks. I haven't seen a palette that fills all of its columns. It seems like most of the palettes fill up about halfway, and then all the pixels are black or they're not used. If you look closely, you'll see an 8th row. It appears that there's no data here, but if there were, it would define special properties. And the special properties that I'm aware of are per material control of reflectance, emissiveness, and environment mapping. So looking at the very bottom left block, each pixel within that block, I'm guessing, controls one of these effects. Using a color control map from a material set, I can demonstrate how SimCity applies colors to materials. So a material is assigned a column, and SimCity assigns a row. So let's say that you pick the window material in the bottom right corner of this material set color control map, and you assign it to the first column of the color palette that you are using for this building. When SimCity spawns this building, it will choose a color palette block from your material beginning with the first row. And I'm pretty sure it begins with the first row. It might pick randomly, but I think it starts from the top and just kind of works its way down and then goes back to the top and works its way down again. So I've shown here that within a single block, the upper left quadrant tints the red portion of the color control map, the lower left tints the green, and the right 2 quadrants tint the blue portion. So it's my understanding that when SimCity is sampling a block, it picks one of the 2 pixels from the right side that define the blue portion of the color control map. And this has to do with efficiency in the way SimCity samples the palette, and it's also the reason why you see here that within each block, the 2 right pixels are identical. As you can also see here, 2x2 blocks are generally just duplicated down almost an entire column of the palette. This means that each variation of this particular building class is all colored exactly the same. It really only has one tint. Now, some building classes will have many possible tints, and some, like this one, will just repeat the same data multiple times. Here's an example of a palette with lots of variation in the blocks. This was taken from the assets that are associated with all of SimCity's Wealth 1, Density 1 buildings, or the tiny shotgun shacks. It's interesting that all these buildings seem to share the same material set and the same color palette. But there's enough variation in the colors of the palette that it helps the same buildings look a lot different from one another. And we saw that in episode 2. So I'm seeing at least 2 possible ways this use of the blocks and the color palettes could be taken advantage of. One way is that every material on a building could be assigned the exact same column, so that when a building spawns, every material in turn gets the same block, resulting in the building getting the same 3 basic colors scattered all around its materials. Now, the other design option is for every material to be assigned a different column, so that there are lots of different colors used on the building. And even though all the colors would come from different blocks, it seems that this whole palette is kind of designed to go together, like they're all made to live inside of one larger color scheme. It reminds me of using a tool like Adobe Cooler for making your own custom color schemes, and all these colors are more or less designed to live together. And also, each block seems to have sort of like 2 neutral colors and 1 pop color. And at least in this palette, the pop color seems to live in the upper left quadrant, which is the quadrant that's assigned to the red portion of the color control map. So that makes it kind of easy if you were designing your own color control map, just remembering that all the red parts get this kind of pop color. Something else to keep in mind is that the color control map is pre-processed, so while you would expect the color control map at the right to look as it does with pure areas of red, green, and blue as placeholders for colors from the color palette like we've learned, the colors actually get shifted to look like this. I wanted to tell you this in case it becomes an issue, but one thing I noticed while exporting materials from SimCity Pack is that SimCity Pack exports the color control map as pure red, green, and blue, the way you would expect it to look, and not the shifted color version the way it looks here. So I'm also hoping that when we get around to making our own color control maps and our own material sets, like I suggested in episode 2, that SimCity Pack will adjust the values of our color control maps on import and shift them into this sort of puke green, pink, and mint way that they're supposed to look for the rendering engine. I'd like to point out that within a color control map, different parts of a material do not necessarily have to be 100% red, green, or blue. I think where that stands out for me here is in the brick texture, where the grout of the brick is a very light red, possibly a white, and the bricks themselves are a darker red. Now, this would result in a slightly different tint being applied from the same block of the color palette. So if we return to our example from episode 1, and we look at this brick texture again, the color from the color block that gets assigned to the brick material, let's say that it's orange. Well, the light red area on the material would receive a very light orange. In fact, here it's so light that it may effectively be white. As far as I understand, this feature of the color palette where one color from the color block results in multiple shades or tintings on the actual material is not taken advantage of that often in SimCity, but it's a really cool kind of design tool that could be useful for more complex color effects. Well, we've now been through 3 lessons of how things work, and if I were you, I would really want to start putting buildings into the game. So as you can see here, I've messed with Oppie's 3ds Max tool, and I've used it to successfully import my simple tiny shotgun shack into the game. You can also see that there's room for improvement, and let me be honest, it looks horrible. My modeling doesn't look that great, I get that, but aside from that, the materials aren't applying right. The windows and door placement is not the same in game as I'm seeing in 3ds Max. It's kind of there. You kind of see, well, there's like 4 windows on the building, and then on the right I see these like 4 lines, and so the windows are there somewhere. But I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I can't get them to tile properly. The roof render's transparent. There's a padding function in the tool that doesn't appear to function yet. So, I've been troubleshooting these problems on and off for a week or so and haven't really figured out solutions. So I don't feel comfortable making a tutorial on using the tool and checking in with Oppie to see like when he'll make it public. Until this process is a little bit more smooth. So I'm going to keep on experimenting. Currently you make an adjustment, then you export the model, import into SimCity Pack and launch the game and go find your building, and then you realize, oh, it doesn't look right at all. Okay, let me go fix this, repeat the whole process again. It's not fun. So, just so you know, you can bypass this tool and import a model that you've exported in the OBJ format straight into SimCity Pack, but you won't get any materials applied to your building. So it's kind of pointless. I mean, the materials kind of make up what defines your building. However, let's see the glass is half full here. This is a good first step. It proves that someone like me who isn't a programmer can at least get some sort of original model into the game. So huge thanks to Oppie for that. I feel like he's made tons of progress, and now hopefully he's ironing out the kinks. So I have no idea how much longer it will be before we have a reliable way to apply materials. And honestly, maybe I'm just not doing it right. Maybe I need to spend more time, in R&D or whatever. So I'm confident, I feel good about, I think we'll figure it out. So in the meantime, I want to encourage you to begin designing, modeling, and creating your custom buildings so that when these tools are ready to go, your buildings are ready to go. Get to it.